NAFI would like to thank AOPA for their generous support for this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. Thank you for joining us for another episode of More Right Rudder, the podcast of the National Association of Flight Instructors. My name is Sarah Stout. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI, and today we are joined by Kim Skipper. She is with the Avemco Insurance Company. She's been with them since 1987. Kim earned her Chartered Property Casualty Underwriter CPCU designation, the industry's highest achievement, in 2002. She's been diligent and instrumental in educating customers and callers about general aviation insurance, as well as training the team of aviation underwriters at Avemco. Kim also holds a property casualty insurance license in all 50 states. She says, "I love the fact that my experience combined with being a direct underwriter allows me to deliver immediate answers to the customers." In her free time, Kim enjoys crocheting, spending time with her family, and is an avid Baltimore Ravens fan. Welcome, Kim.
Well, thank you for having us, Sarah. We appreciate it.
We're certainly excited you're here. So we got this conversation started. You guys were chatting with Karen Kalashek, our board chair, at an event, and we're kind of sharing some stories about kind of unusual or even sometimes funny or comical claims that come across Avemco and your desk in particular. So give us some background. When a pilot calls up with a claim, let's kind of start there. How does the claim end up being reviewed by you or your team?
Basically, when they call in, they talk to our claims office. The claims office will work their way through everything and actually handle the claim. But I actually get notice of all the claims and actually will look at every single file to see, what happened. Are there things that we can educate our customers on that occurred, or we look at them as well just for overall, are we going to continue to offer coverage on this person going forward?
Okay.
Depending on the nature and the severity of the claim.
All right. So if it's out there, you've seen it.
I've seen it.
All right. So you're a great one for us to be talking to.
Yeah.
So for the world of flight instructors, tell us about some claims you've seen where perhaps some guidance from a flight instructor or lessons learned from the claim a flight instructor could take forward. We're thinking about the scenarios where, a flight instructor may be able to provide guidance to an individual aircraft owner they're working with, or maybe they're training up a student pilot who has ambitions to be an aircraft owner or part of a flying club.
Some of the ones that would fall into that category would be securing items better, perhaps, in the airplane. We've had one not too long ago where the instructor and the student were coming in and landing, and they heard the back window break. So initially they weren't sure what broke the back window, but upon claims examination, the hole in the window and the size of the wheel chock matched. So it basically, they had some turbulence, it popped up and went right through the window.
Oh, yeah. Using those cargo nets or strapping it down somehow, or tucking it under a seat and wrapping it around something if you can.
So we've seen one like that. We've also seen a ladder that was being transported for some reason, also not secured as it maybe should have been, that bounced up and did hit a window.
Can I ask what kind of aircraft that was to be transported on a ladder?
I don't believe it was, an 8 or 9 foot ladder. It was probably more of a step stool type thing.
Okay. I was going to say, like I'm pretty impressed.
Or a 182. It wasn't a large, enormous ladder by any stretch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I'm thinking of the ladder I have in my basement for, hanging Christmas lights and things like that.
Absolutely. We had a rear door get opened in error in flight. They thought it was latched. They went to double check that it was latched, and instead of latching it, they unlatched something. The door opened, which we've seen frequently, but this opened in a manner that the wind actually caught it and literally ripped the door off. It flew over, hit the fuselage, hit the tail, and has not been seen since.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've had that pop open on Piper before.
Hmm.
But never like actually open.
Yeah,
Just kind
this
of
one
it got a
opened.
little windy, a little noisy. Like, okay, you knew something was going on back there, but um,
Exactly.
yeah,
We've
so good
also.
lessons on making sure stuff really is
Mhm.
secure, and a lot of those have locks. So, consider actually locking that
Mhm.
before flight to kind of help prevent those types of things. And it's a good
Mhm.
double check that it actually really is secure if it's locked.
Right. And then I take it a step further and check those things that you're using to secure it. We had an aerobatic aircraft not too long ago where the bracket that held the fire extinguisher broke in flight. And again, the pilot was lucky in that it just hit the windshield and it didn't hit him.
Yeah.
But it did. The bracket that was holding it securely in place so that it didn't come loose broke, and it did fly up and again put a nice round hole that matched the bottom of the fire extinguisher right into the glass.
Oh, wow. See, and that's something as like flight instructors, like a lot of times we'll like look that it's there, we'll give the fire,
Mm-hmm.
maybe give it a little jiggle, make sure it is secure. But
Mm-hmm.
gosh, I don't know that I've ever like gotten way down there and like checked that bracket like
Yeah.
deeply for corrosion or, maybe it got bumped with this, you never know, it gets bumped with shoes or something like that.
Yeah.
So always make
Something
sure
at
it's
some
secure, but I've
point
never
could
checked
break
for
it.
corrosion or anything like that.
Yeah. And then we've also had issues where uh, people will use step stools and other means of helping load things into the airplane. We had one person in particular that actually had tied a rope to the little plastic step stool so that once he was in the airplane, he literally would pull it in. Well, he didn't one time. He took off, and needless to say, the step stool was still attached and behind the airplane and did end up putting a hole in the airplane.
Oh, wow. So that would be probably a larger aircraft then if you're using step stools to hoist yourself up in. So it's definitely
Yeah.
something to think about because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't need to be, I mean, that much bigger. I was using when I was flying a Piper Mirage, like I had a step stool, so I could just get up high enough to check the oil in that because I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't see it just from the ground. And so, that would probably fall more into the unsecured stuff. We always had to make sure we tucked it away
Right.
and that I didn't have a string tied to it, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly had a step stool I carried around for certain things.
Yeah. Or when you're using, we had a customer using a ladder to fuel the airplane, obviously to
Mhm.
get up there and getting off the ladder, holding the fuel nozzle in one hand, got off the ladder. It was just windy enough that the wind caught the ladder and banged it into the airplane.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great flight training scenario because flight
Mm-hmm.
instructors are, training, new aircraft owners or student pilots, or maybe someone's transitioning into a new make and model, and that
Mm-hmm.
those high wings. I've certainly, at some far-flung non-towered field had to grab the ladder that's next to the fuel tank and
Mm-hmm.
the self-serve tank and climb on up there. So yeah, being careful in those windy
Mm-hmm.
conditions.
Another one along those lines I would add is that we had a pilot take off unknowingly to him that the seatbelt was actually outside the airplane when the door shut. His headset was on, so he did not hear that as he took off, the airplane seatbelt was actually bouncing in the wind off the side of the airplane, and it did some, damage to the a little bit of damage to the fuselage, but definitely managed to do a number on the paint job on the side of the airplane, and just was completely unaware. Put the headset on, was listening and communicating, and it noise canceled what was going on outside the airplane, and he didn't hear it
So
until he came
presumably this
back
was the
in
opposite side door and seatbelt.
opposite. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Especially like if you had you, dropped off a passenger or
Mm-hmm. I think
um
that's what had occurred.
yeah, so even just going back to, double checking those doors from the outside and making
Mm-hmm.
sure they're secure um and all of that. And it always goes back, I've seen a lot of places where they have the practice of latching the seat belts like when they're not in use if no
Mm-hmm.
one's in the aircraft. So, if no one's in that seat, that might be something consider as well as
Yeah.
a good visual on the seatbelt and where it
Hmm.
is. And I know some aircraft now with modern systems and airbag systems, you'd have to check if there's any limitations against that. I'm not familiar, but
Hmm.
um, certainly having good eyes on that seatbelt.
That definitely would make a difference. And I would say these are what I would call very unusual in that I may have seen one or two of these over 38 years. It's not one I see on a regular basis, like, loss of control, taxiing into things. We see people hit hangars repeatedly, pushing your airplane into the hangar. You've got your marks on the floor to know where to stop, or you put your chocks on the ground, and at some point somebody jostled them just enough that as you're pushing the airplane back in, you strike a tail or the wing on the corner. I see at least one of those probably a week where putting the airplane in the hangar just lost visual on exactly where the corners of the airplane and the hangar were, and they come in contact.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm having visions back to I have a couple of bricks in my garage, and that's when my when
Mm-hmm.
my front tire taps the bricks. I'm perfectly where I need to be.
Right. Right. And we see, those type of things with the airplane, but over time, if you hit it a little bit harder than maybe you did and they start moving a little bit, you're relying on, oh, when it hits that, that's when I'm going to stop. Well, if it's been moved a little bit, sometimes you hit that and the hanger at the same time. So
Yeah,
we see
there was
that
one
type of
time with my
thing.
parking bricks in my garage. My husband moved them. He was
Mhm.
just sweeping the garage, forgot to put them back, and I didn't even think about it. And I realized I was in far enough when I bumped the bicycles. When I parked in front of my car. Whoops.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, certainly I've had experience of that with hangers. The last couple of hangers I used, like I kind of like visually knew like, okay, this crack in the concrete here, as long as I have the nose on
Mhm.
this, and I knew if it got too far either side, left or right, it was time to start checking wingtips,
Mhm.
and being real careful. But as long as I was straight and on like this particular crack,
Yeah.
it was good. And thankfully it was a much deeper hanger than I needed.
Mhm.
So we weren't too worried about that unless I had to use one of the back parking spots. But yeah, definitely that awareness. All right, so those are all great lessons for flight
Mhm.
instructors. Even if, you're saying they're kind of onesie twosies here and
Mhm.
there, like it's not hard to close to close a seatbelt in a door.
Mhm.
I heard of a very similar accident, gosh, probably 20 years ago, where I forget they had a hard landing or got turbulence, but I've heard of chocks hitting rear windscreens or
Mhm.
rear windows or side windows before, and a lot of us carry chocks, and
Mhm.
so it's always good to be secure, and it can be just anything. The fire extinguisher one's a bit of a surprise,
Yeah.
but I could also see that too. So
Yeah.
um,
That one was a surprise to me in that when it came across, I'm like, wow, I don't think I've seen this one before.
right, especially in aerobatics and all the
Yeah.
maneuvering that would do for it to just go right through. I'm trying to think
Hmm.
like what we would be doing on a typical training.
Yeah.
Thinking like your typical certificate or rating,
Hmm.
high
Yeah.
performance endorsement type training flight that would even like jostle
Exactly.
that fire extinguisher to get up that far outside of, some pretty crazy turbulence. But
Hmm.
certainly an aerobatic, it wouldn't be hard to have something loose be flying around. And unfortunately, it had to be the big heavy thing that day.
It was.
How wild. Now, one other thing you guys had talked about when Avemco and Karen were having their conversation, there are just some funny stories out there
Hmm.
of insurance claims because the world just happens around us, whether we like it
Hmm.
or not sometimes. So can you tell us just for kind of for the sake of entertainment, what are some of
Okay.
those good ones?
Um, wind, you think normally you think of wind and you think, okay, well, some hurricane or tornado, that type of thing. We had wind versus a porta potty, and the wind won, but the 172 didn't win because
Oh,
the wind was strong enough. It blew the porta potty into a 172 and damaged it.
oh, and that's like a hazmat cleanup and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah,
Like,
that was not fun. Let's just say it hit the fan.
Yeah.
for a better way
Yeah,
of
I would
putting
just be
it.
like, nope, it's a loss. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
can't.
that and we've also saw unsecured or improperly chalked air stair get blown across. Again, we're talking heavy winds, like sometimes we see them, those storms where you get 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds,
Mhm.
and it blew into a Corvallis, the old
Oh wow.
or the newer Cessna now, but Corvallis back in the day, and did quite a bit of damage to it as well.
Yeah, there was a storm a couple years ago around where I live that got into winds like that. It was just a big thunderstorm, and it
Mm-hmm.
pushed it on, or I think it like broke a tie down rope and pushed an airplane into another one. That other one ended up having to replace a good portion of the wing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do see a lot of that. We see a lot of that in Alaska as well, where the airplanes are appropriately tied down with the appropriate everything. They're not frayed, they're not anything. And the wind just snaps those cords and the airplanes get tossed around. And it looks like somebody took, unfortunately, the pictures look like somebody took a bunch of toy airplanes and literally threw them in the air and they fell on top of each other.
Yeah, so I would think that region would be particularly susceptible to some significant winds
Mm-hmm.
with winter and even just funneling through mountain passes and things like that.
Yeah. So we do see a lot of win-wins other than the normal ones, but these two just stood out as, the porta potty and the air stair were ones. I think I've only seen one of each of those in 38 years. So the odds of seeing it again are slim and none, but it's just different.
But there's still lessons learned there that we
Yeah.
can pass on to aircraft owners and potential learners,
Hmm.
even when we're in the cross country phase, or even before then, if we're just
Hmm.
gonna hop over somewhere for the $100 hamburger, or
Hmm.
something as part of a training flight, to look around the ramp and
Hmm.
consider any objects around you that might be unsecured. Especially
Hmm.
if you're planning to stay overnight, maybe over the course of lunch. Okay, ideally you want to get 50 or 60-mile-an-hour winds come out of nowhere.
Right.
But if you're gonna spend the night or
Hmm. Or if
a
that's maybe
couple
where
of
you keep your
days, yeah,
airplane.
be cognizant of what unsecured objects could be out on that ramp.
Hmm. And then we've had a couple other ones that basically involved the airplane being at the shop. We had a Bonanza that was up on jacks because they were working on the landing gear. Well, it fell off the jacks. It ultimately totaled the airplane. Now the shop, in that case, the shop did pay for it, but again, it did come across my desk. I did see it.
Right, that'll go through a lot of people's insurance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, the other thing we saw is somebody hit the airplane with a forklift. One of
Oh,
the mechanics in the shop was using a forklift for some purpose, and literally the top piece of it went through the wing,
oh,
just
like impaled it.
impaled the airplane. Not distracted, not paying attention at the moment. Thought they had more clearance. The exact reason is unknown, but again, it did put a quite a dent and a hole in the wing.
Yeah, I would bet. And then that's like, did that like go through like the fuel system
Yeah,
and
it did quite a number on it. It wasn't a quick fix,
no.
to say.
Not at all. So yeah, those you're yeah, that's a little bit more out of any owners or instructor's hand that we could provide guidance on, other
Exactly.
than yeah, talk to your fellow pilots about, who they feel is a reputable shop around. But even
Yeah.
then, even the absolute best shops, we're all human. Um,
Yeah. Exactly.
Things like that are gonna pop up,
Hmm.
unfortunately, from time to time. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, we are running up against our time here. So, Kim,
Okay.
what would you say is like the funniest or the most
Okay.
unusual claim you've seen across your desk where it was just like a head scratcher? Like, yeah, I feel bad for the guy, but I'm still gonna
Let's
get a chuckle out of this.
talk about a few animals.
Okay.
We had a moose that fell in love with an airplane. He was very amorous toward it, and let's just say he damaged the tail and rudder area.
Oh,
Um, Apparently, thought it. Yeah, uh, the neighbor had to shoo the moose away. That was kind of an odd one. We've seen
oh, that's a
moose
brave
use.
neighbor. I would not
Yeah,
if Moose are big.
They are.
I mean, in a rutting moose is
Hmm.
no, you would I
Yeah. I think the moose was rather intent on what he was doing, let's just say.
yeah,
The
I would just
moment.
walk away from that moose. Like
Mhm.
I would want to live. Like let the moose.
Yeah.
Kudos to
Uh,
the neighbor, I guess.
exactly. We've had bears literally destroy the fabric of an airplane because they smelled a dead animal in it. For
Oh,
someone that maybe had, taken some meat back home or any kind of food in
yeah, like those
there. And
hunting and fishing wilderness type trips.
exactly. Uh-huh. As well as we've had bears literally chew on the tires as if it was a chew toy for a dog. And there, puncture marks all over the tower, all over the tires. We've had cows wander into hangars and use the elevators as back scratchers,
Oh, how funny.
just because they were there. Um, and
I
then we
that
did
never would have crossed my mind.
no. And the last one, and we tend to make a little more fun of it, is that an airplane did hit a coyote, but we had the claims examiners look and they couldn't find the Acme products or the Roadrunner nearby. But we know that the Roadrunner was involved in that one, so to speak.
Oh, how comical.
Yeah. So that one, we see a lot of deer strikes where they've actually hit the deer hard enough with the wing that it actually punctures the fuel tanks.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard of that before.
Mhm.
Um I had a friend who he didn't get into an accident with a deer, but he was actually on his instrument check ride and there was a deer on the runway, so
Mhm.
he had to do an additional missed approach and go back and do another approach because he couldn't take the approach to the landing
Yeah.
because of a deer on the runway. So I mean,
Yeah.
thankfully they saw it
Yeah.
and were
Yeah.
able to avoid anything. But
Yeah.
yeah, he bought himself a couple extra tenths of check ride because of a
There you
deer.
go. We do see that frequently, and unfortunately, a lot of airports are in an area where you could check, but once you're committed, and there's no turning back other than to hope for the best.
Yeah. Thankfully, yeah, like I said, thankfully they still had room, since it was a check ride, like, it
Hmm.
was still decent VFR and
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it was still daytime, so or
Hmm.
around that sunset time. It was enough that he saw it from far enough out.
Yeah.
It was safe. He wasn't doing any unusual maneuvering or anything
Hmm.
to avoid it. So thankfully, thankfully with deer, he ended up in that boat. But I've
Yeah.
certainly heard of plenty of deer events. So. All right, Kim. Well, thank you so much for
You're
taking the
welcome.
time to be on More Right Rudder with us today. Avemco is one of our major partners, and they've been a longtime partner of NAFI,
Hmm.
and we really support all that you guys do in getting our message out to flight
Hmm.
instructors.
And we appreciate having the opportunity to come in here and share some of our world with you.
Okay, yeah, we're glad 'cause insurance is one of those kind of like mysterious worlds to a lot of
Exactly.
pilots. So we really appreciate the openness and the willingness to share that information because it is its own highly technical separate world. We went through all your credentials and licensures and everything
Hmm.
at the beginning and it's its own deep in the weeds thing. And so we're glad to have such great communicators and partners in bringing
Yeah.
that world to more available to the pilot
Hmm.
audience. So, all right, great. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Kim.
Thank you.
Listeners to the More Right Rudder podcast can get $10 off their NAFI membership. Use the code POD49, POD49 at checkout at nafinet.org. This code is good for both new and renewal memberships.